Have you ever wondered what the third age of Middle-earth is referring to? There must be two previous ages. What happened during those times, and why does an age change? Before I jump into it, there's marked chapters if you're just curious about one or two of the ages. Okay, so first let's broadly define what an age of Middle-earth even is. An age of Middle-earth is a long historical period that marks a major phase in the world's story, beginning and ending with a great world-changing event. So an age isn't a fixed number of years, it's more like a chapter in the world's history. Let's take an overview of all the ages of Middle-earth and dive into a little of each. Before I begin, I'm going to be taking an overview approach, so I will be leaving some details out or this video would be extremely long. Most of this information is in the Silmarillion, which I highly recommend you read if you haven't. Okay, so we need to start at the very beginning, like when there was no time or space. There was only the god of Tolkien's world, Eru Iluvatar, who created the Ainur, the Holy Ones, which were the offspring of his thought. Together through music, they created the entire universe, or Ea. Some of the Ainur then entered Ea and began to shape it. They became the Valar and the Maiar, the divine powers who govern Arda, the physical location of future Middle-earth. This time period is called the Year of the Trees, and it technically isn't one of the ages, but so much happens that I couldn't leave it out. The major events in this age include the Valar building two great lamps to light the world they built, but Melkor, who created discord in the music of the Ainur and has thus been the main antagonist from the beginning, destroyed these lights. This will become a running theme. This is when the Valar created the two trees of Valinor to light up their own country in the far west. That's right, there were two trees that produced light. That light blessed the land of the Valar, named Aman. At this point, Middle-earth was still in darkness, and the only light they had was from stars. Next was the moment the Valar had been preparing for. The elves awoke in Middle-earth. They had awoken in the east of Arda, on the opposite side of the world from the Valar. That gave Melkor, who didn't live in Aman, a chance to capture and corrupt some of these elves, making them into orcs. Tolkien will later change his mind about this, but in the Silmarillion, that's what happens. The dwarves also came into existence at this time, but they don't really play a role in the story until later. Melkor then waged war on the Valar. He had already recruited the spirits that would become Balrogs by this time. To help protect the elves from Melkor, the Valar did something that would later cause a lot of trouble. They summoned the elves to dwell in Aman, and many went, but some stayed, creating the different elf kindreds. Back in Aman, the elves who made the journey there mostly lived in peace, but one elf named Feanor did all kinds of terrible things, mostly influenced by Melkor though. But he also created the jewels known as the Silmarils, from the light of the two trees. These three jewels of light are the main magical objects of the first age that both sides will fight over. Eventually, Melkor did his destroying of the lights thing, and with the help of a vast, dark, spider-like spirit of insatiable hunger and shadow, who devours light herself named Ungoliant, he destroyed the two trees and threw the world back into darkness. They left Aman in a hurry and had their own fight over the loot, and the Balrogs had to come save Melkor. The destruction of the two hollow trees is what brings the mythical pre-First Age era to an end, and that's what starts the First Age of Middle-earth. The First Age is known as the Elder Days. This age is what most of the book, the Silmarillion, is written about, and as you can imagine, the Silmarils play a vital part. To compensate for the lack of light in the world, due to the two trees being destroyed, the Valar used the last flower and fruit of the trees to create the sun and moon. The moon rose first, but when the sun rose, Middle-earth was no longer in darkness, and this was the appointed time for men to come into the story. Men were known as the Second-born, and play a small but crucial role in this age. Famous heroes such as Huar, Tuor, Hurin, Turin, Beren, and Eärendil helped the elves with their fight against Melkor, who stole the Silmarils after he destroyed the trees. This long, drawn-out war between Melkor, now renamed Morgoth, and the elves of Middle-earth was called the War of the Jewels. The elves who fought in this war were mostly the Noldor, a branch of elves that came back to Middle-earth from Valinor to have their own realms and reclaim the Silmarils. During this time, the great elven kingdoms, minus Doriath, which had already existed, were built. There were 6 major battles in the War of the Jewels, the last being the event that brings the First Age to an end. Some of the most epic moments of the Silmarillion take place during these battles, like an elf named Thingolfin, the High King of the Noldor, challenging Morgoth to a one-on-one fight, and he actually scares Morgoth with the challenge. He sadly lost, but what a moment. The battles swayed back and forth, and the elves even had the enemy under siege for 400 years, but that ended with the Battle of Sudden Flame, where Morgoth was able to push the elves back and break the siege. It only got worse for the elves after that, and the next battle was one of the most brutal set of events in all of Tolkien's legendarium. This battle was appropriately called the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. There was a large attack in which Morgoth used spies and treachery to win and gain complete control of the north. Shortly after this battle, the last of the Elven kingdoms, the great city of Gondolin, fell to Morgoth. Things were looking very bad for the elves, and they were basically down to a refugee city set up on the southern coast called the Havens of Sirion. But they did have a Silmaril, the one that Beren and Luthien took from Morgoth's crown, and they had a half-elven, half-man named Eärendil, a descendant of Beren and Luthien. Because of his heritage and destiny, the whole First Age had come down to Eärendil, like a bottleneck in an hourglass, and because of his actions, the legendarium exploded out again. He took it upon himself to sail into the west to Valinor, which had been hidden from the world since the elves left, so this was basically a suicide mission. Before he left though, he had twins named Elros and Elrond. Elros would lead the First Men of Númenor as their king, and while Elrond would become very important as well, as a lore master and Lord of Rivendell, among other things. Luckily, Eärendil had the Silmaril with him during his voyage into the west, and he was able to make it to Valinor and plead the case of elves and men to the Valar, which he was uniquely qualified to do, being of both kindreds. He asked for their help to fight Morgoth, and because of him, the Valar sent a host of Maiar and elves, for not all had left Valinor, to Middle-earth, and they fought in the War of Wrath. Morgoth was defeated, and during the turmoil of battle, the entire land of Beleriand, where pretty much all of the events of the First Age took place, broke and was swallowed by the sea. That's how the First Age ended, and the Second Age began. Since some houses of men, known as the Edain, fought Morgoth in the War of Wrath, they were rewarded by the Valar with longer lifespans than ordinary men, as well as their own land, an island in the west between Valinor and Middle-earth, named Númenor, which means Land of Gift. Since the Númenorians lived in peace for so long and had contact with elves who would sail from the west and visit, they became a great civilization, and eventually they sailed back to Middle-earth and made colonies. During this time, they built things like Orthanc and Minas Tirith, then called Minas Anor. Think of the Númenorians as the Romans of their world. They were the peak of human civilization at the time. But just like Rome though, things wouldn't last forever. This is the time that Sauron rose to power and relevance in Middle-earth. Sauron had been around since the very beginning, but now that his boss Morgoth was gone, he stepped up and became the main villain in the story. At first, Sauron used his cunning to achieve his old master's goal of dominating Middle-earth, and he took on the fair guise of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and with the elven smiths of Eregion, they forged the Rings of Power. Then in secret, he of course made the One Ring to control all the others. The elves perceived his betrayal though, and hid their 3 rings, which Sauron had no hand in making. Eventually, the Númenorians brought a fleet to Middle-earth and defeated Sauron, but unwisely, they decided to take him back to Númenor with them. This was the beginning of the end for them. After some time, Sauron was let out of captivity and even became a trusted advisor to the king of Númenor. The Númenorians had been becoming more estranged with the elves and the Valar. They became unhappy that even though they had longer lives than ordinary men, they were still mortal. What they didn't understand is that men are not bound to Arda and leave when they die, which was a gift from Ilúvatar, something even the elves would come to envy. Sauron was able to use this desire for immortality to create strife in the Númenorian society, creating 2 factions, the Faithful and the Kingsmen. The king of Númenor, Ar-Pharazôn, and the Kingsmen sailed into the west with a great fleet. They landed in Valinor and were going to fight the Valar for the right to be immortal, but they ended up being trapped under fallen hills in the Caves of the Forgotten for eternity, and the island of Númenor was swallowed into the sea. The Valar had done this to punish them, and then the Valar removed Valinor from the physical world. This is awesome when the world became round. Yes, it was a flat earth until this time. Sauron was able to abandon his physical form during the downfall of Númenor, since he's a Maia, which is a lesser Valar, like Gandalf and the Balrogs. Sauron fled back to Middle-earth, and it would be a long time until he could gain physical form again, and he could only appear as a terrible dark presence from this point on. The other faction of Númenorian society, the minority called the Faithful, because they stayed faithful to the elves and the Valar, and did not want to fight them for immortality, had been waiting off the east coast of Númenor with 9 ships while the island had sunk. Thus they were borne to Middle-earth on huge waves, and they survived. They had been warned by the divine powers and thus were saved. Elendil, which means elf friend, and his 2 sons, Isildur and Anarion, were the leaders of these people. Elendil was born upon the waves to the north of Middle-earth and created the kingdom of Arnor, while his sons went south and created the kingdom of Gondor. Elendil ruled both kingdoms, just like Aragorn would one day. Sauron was rather mad at the Númenorians for what happened, and since Elendil was High King of the only Númenorians left, they went to war, which culminated in the War of the Last Alliance. There were still some Noldor elves in Middle-earth, and Gil-galad was their king. Elendil and Gil-galad combined their forces and defeated Sauron in the Battle of Dagorlad and the Siege of Barad-dûr. Unfortunately though, they both lost their lives during the battle, and it was Isildur who cut the ring off Sauron and won the day. That was the end of the Second Age and the beginning of the Third. The Third Age is called the Age of Decline, and it's an age of fading magic, waning kingdoms, and the rise of men. This is like the Middle Ages when they believed the past was better than the future, and the glory days of Númenor, like Rome, were but a memory. This is when the stories of The Hobbit and nearly all the Lord of the Rings take place. After the War of the Last Alliance, Isildur kept the One Ring and was killed riding north to Arnor. The One Ring laid in the Anduin River until Déagol and Sméagol came along. Then Bilbo was recruited to be a burglar in Thorin's company, where on their journey to the Lonely Mountain, he found the One Ring and had very wisely decided not to kill Gollum when he had had the chance. Bilbo was able to help Thorin and the band of dwarves kill Smaug the dragon and restore the kingdom of Erebor. Bilbo then gave the ring to Frodo, and with a lot of help, mostly from Sam, he was able to fight the small everyday battles with the One Ring, while the rest of the Fellowship overthrew Saruman and aided in bringing the forces of Rohan and Gondor together to fight in the defense of Minas Tirith and then battle at the Black Gates. In the end, Frodo couldn't destroy the One Ring, and Tolkien himself said that no one could have, especially inside the place where it was made, and its powers at their highest. In the end, the One Ring was destroyed by divine intervention with Gollum as the instrument of Ilúvatar. Sauron was destroyed because he poured a majority of his power into the ring, so he could dominate the others, and that power was now gone. The elves who had been in decline since the battles of the First Age were now without the powers of their rings, and their lands would now be subject to the passing of time and decay. The age officially ended when the elven ring-bearers set sail into the west for Valinor. Elves could not once again sail to Valinor, so they could return home to a land without grief or the decay of time, and they left Middle-earth to be ruled by men. The elves who did stay would eventually fade into the Unseed World and exist no more to the eyes of men. That brings us to the Fourth Age, the Age of Men. Aragorn was King Elessar at this time, and he ruled both Arnor and Gondor. He was eventually succeeded by his son Eldarion. Sam, Legolas, and Gimli all ended up sailing to Valinor during this time as well. Sam was able to go because he was a ring-bearer, and Gimli because of his friendship with Legolas. So that's an overview of the ages, and some of the important events that took place therein. If you made it this far and you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and thanks!